Before this final story begins, I want to thank you for being here, for choosing to spend these 10 days listening, for staying with the quiet moments, the slow connections, the small kinds of courage that don't always get told. This last story is a closing, not an ending, a pause before the season moves on. Wherever you're listening from, whatever this time of year holds for you, I hope these stories offered a little warmth or recognition or space to breathe. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. Now, let's begin.
Christmas Eve always starts the same way, with James stealing Mason's socks. Not borrowing, stealing, off his feet, while Mason is still wearing them. "Those are on my body," Mason says, hopping on one foot across the living room while James retreats toward the couch, sock raised in triumph. "You weren't using them correctly," James says. "They were just existing. They were attached to me." "Exactly. Distracting." Mason lunges. James laughs, collapses onto the couch, and Mason ends up half on top of him, breath knocked loose, their faces far too close for two men who have spent nearly a decade insisting they are just friends. They freeze. It's brief, barely a second, not because they didn't notice moments like this, but because acknowledging them felt like touching a load-bearing wall. James clears his throat first. "Anyway, Christmas." Mason rolls off him, heart doing something inconvenient. Right, Christmas. They've been best friends since college, met during an orientation icebreaker neither of them wanted to attend, bonded over mutual hatred of forced conversation and bad coffee, stayed inseparable through bad apartments, worse jobs, failed relationships, and one ill-advised attempt at growing herbs on a fire escape that died within a week. Every Christmas Eve ends up here. Mason's apartment, James's terrible wrapping paper, the same playlist, the same jokes, the same careful silence. Mason adjusts the tree lights while James arranges snacks with the seriousness of someone defusing a bomb. "You put the cheese too close to the cookies," Mason says. "They like each other. They are fundamentally incompatible." James looks up. "And we're what?" Mason doesn't turn around. "Besties." "Right," James says too easily. They've corrected people for years. Roommates, best friends, basically family. They correct them quickly, before assumptions settle into questions, before questions demand answers. James's phone rings. He jumps like it startled him. "Sorry, hang on." It's James's mother on FaceTime, already emotional and wearing an aggressive Christmas sweater. "Hi, Mom." "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Is Mason there?" Mason waves from across the room. "Hi, Mrs. Reynolds." "Oh, good, you're together," she says, pleased. "You always are on Christmas Eve. I love that." James smiles. "Yeah." "You know," she adds, lowering her voice, "your aunt keeps asking when you're finally going to make it official." Mason chokes on air. James laughs too loud. "Make what official?" "Oh, don't play dumb. I'm old, not blind." They hang up shortly after. Silence stretches. Mason busies himself with the lights again. James checks his phone, then puts it face down. Mason has wondered before what would happen if they stopped correcting people so fast, if they let the assumptions sit. Assumptions were easy. Assumptions didn't require courage. They could live inside other people's expectations without risking their own. They open wine, drink faster than planned. The gifts are small, thoughtful, the kind that don't require explanation because they already know too much about each other. Mason gives James a scarf in his favorite color. James gives Mason a book he had been wanting but never mentioned. They don't comment on it. They never do. They are good at this version of love, the one that doesn't ask for promises, the one that shows up reliably and never demands more than it's given. Saying it out loud feels like it would change the shape of something steady, turn something durable into something fragile. Later, James disappears into the kitchen and returns with mugs of something that smells like cinnamon and questionable judgment. "Careful," he says. "It's strong." "Good. I need courage." James pauses. "For what?" Mason waves a hand. "Surviving your holiday playlist." James laughs, but it doesn't quite reach his eyes. Snow starts falling outside. The city quiets. The pressure doesn't. James stands abruptly. Okay, I need to say something." Mason's heart stutters. James opens his mouth, and his phone rings again. They stare at it like it has personally betrayed them. James answers, apologizing under his breath. Work crisis, one that absolutely could wait but never does. Mason goes to the window, presses his forehead to the glass. He had rehearsed this moment in his head more times than he could count. Every version ended the same way, not with rejection, but with loss. Not losing James exactly, losing the certainty of always being allowed in his life. James hangs up. Sorry, I was just... Yeah, me too. They laugh, brittle and tired. Time slips forward. The clock edges toward midnight. James fidgets. Mason paces. The truth is, the thing they've been protecting is already changing. The silence isn't preserving anything anymore. It's just postponing the fracture. Whatever came next might hurt. Silence stopped feeling safe. Do you ever think... Then stops. Mason turns. What? James looks at him. Really looks. Do you ever think we're already past the point where not talking about it is worse than talking about it? Mason exhales. Talking about what? James doesn't look away. Us. No music swell, no dramatic pause. Just the word, finally spoken. Mason laughs once. It comes out wrong. We don't have an us. James nods. Right. But, Mason says, voice shaking now, if we did, it would be terrifying. James exhales. Yeah. Silence stretches. Then Mason says it, not cleanly, not bravely. I love you. It spills out like a confession and an apology all at once. James doesn't move. Mason rushes on. I wasn't afraid you wouldn't love me, his voice cracks. I was afraid that loving me would cost you the safest thing either of us has ever had. James's eyes fill. You idiot, he says softly. You absolute idiot. Mason winces. Fair. James crosses the room and pulls Mason into a hug so tight it almost hurts. I've loved you since the fire escape herbs, James says into his shoulder. I just thought if we named it, we'd break it. Mason laughs, breathless and crying. We're terrible at this. We really are. James kisses him. It's clumsy. Too much teeth. Perfect anyway. They laugh against each other's mouths, relief flooding the room. Later, much later, they collapse onto the couch. So, James says casually, if we're doing honesty, I've already thought about rings. Mason groans. Of course you have. I like preparedness. Outside, snow keeps falling. Inside, nothing is unsaid. Christmas arrives. Epilogue. 1 year later. The next Christmas looks different. Fuller, warmer, louder. The apartment is alive, coats piled on chairs, laughter spilling from the kitchen, family voices overlapping without apology. Someone's aunt is already crying. Someone's dad is pretending not to. This time, Christmas morning isn't just a tradition. It's a wedding. There is no aisle, just a living room cleared of furniture, a tree glowing in the corner, and Mason standing in mismatched socks because James forgot to remind him again. James straightens Mason's tie, hands steady now. You ready? He asks. Mason smiles, bright and certain. I've been ready for a year. The vows are short, honest, uncomplicated. Promises that sound less like beginnings and more like recognition. When they kiss, the room erupts. Cheers, applause, someone shouting, finally. Later, after the last goodbye and the door clicks shut, James collapses onto the couch and steals Mason's socks. Mason lets him. Some traditions are worth keeping. End.